These days, the original Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles game for the NES is often dragged through the digital mud, remembered as an unrelenting, borderline broken mess that traumatised an entire generation of gamers. Whether it's the punishing difficulty, the infamous underwater bomb defusal level, or the fact that half the turtles feel practically useless, the internet consensus seems to be that it's horrible, an awful game. But here's the thing, are those people actually wrong? Could it be that this much maligned cartridge deserves a second chance, and that beneath the frustration lies a product far more ambitious, misunderstood, and even groundbreaking than it's often given credit for? Maybe the real tragedy here isn't the game itself, but the way history remembers it. So with that said, hello ladies and gentlemen, Big Daddy Topbat here. Join me today as we finally confront that game. Yeah. We really have been treated to some of the best beat-em-ups ever recently. But what's more mental is you can now enjoy some of these games for next to nothing. Use my links to get Shredder's Revenge for under $15, Streets of Rage 4 for under $10, and one of my favourite brawlers ever, Double Dragon Gaiden, for less than $5. I have huge discounts on thousands of games via the pinned comment. Each purchase supports the channel and you can get bargains simultaneously. Happy shopping and hope you enjoy the video. Throughout the noughties, the first NES Turtles title was dragged back into public consciousness in part thanks to one particularly scathing roast, courtesy of the angry video game nerd, back when he was still calling himself the angry Nintendo nerd. His vulgar takedown went viral at a time when going viral was still a novelty, and in doing so permanently welded this cartridge's legacy to rage, ridicule and pixelated pain. But was the nerd's brutal assessment entirely fair? Or has the game's reputation been cursed by comedy ever since? Throughout this period, the game would continue to gain newfound notoriety. In 2007, this very same title was re-released for the Nintendo Wii Virtual Console, giving a new generation of unsuspecting players a chance to experience it. This time, however, it wasn't a character with a pocket protector screaming obscenities. No, this time it was the game's press, IGN, GameSpot, Nintendo Life, they all tore the game to shreds. No satire, no spectacle, just straight up condemnation, branding the game as a clunky, broken mess that never deserved its original success. So here's the big question, if this game was truly so dreadful, why do I still see people pop up in my comment section declaring it a hidden gem? Why decades later do some players insist this NES title is actually good? Well, to get to the bottom of this, we're going to explore the entire bizarre tale in more detail. So let's head back to the beginning. The year is 1989. Turtles fever is in full swing. Children across planet Earth are gorging themselves on half-shell heroism, from cartoon reruns to plastic nunchucks. With the animated TV show becoming a marketing juggernaut, it was inevitable that the video games would follow, not just as merchandise but as key pillars of Turtlemania. Enter Konami, yes, the legendary Japanese developer responsible for Castlevania, Contra and Gradius, a studio that knew its way around arcade cabinets and cartridge pins alike. They were handed the task of developing Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles games for both arcade and home consoles, but thanks to Nintendo's bizarre licensing rules limiting publishers to 5 titles per year, Konami got sneaky and published the NES version under a fake label, Ultra Games. Naughty naughty. Now in arcades, the Turtles exploded onto the scene with a 4-player beat-em-up that looked and sounded like the cartoon had leapt onto the TV screen. This 1989 coin-op classic was a smash hit, and would later be ported to home consoles as Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2, the arcade game. But before that joy was brought home, there was this. As you can see, this title was a different beast entirely. A grimier, less forgiving, more experimental kind of Turtles game. Released a few months prior to the arcade cabinet, the original NES Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles was the very first time fans could play as their heroes in a half-shell from the comfort of their living rooms. And for a year, it was a Nintendo exclusive. Rather than trying to mimic the arcade format, this title went its own way. Like most NES heavyweights of the time, Turtles was fundamentally a side-scrolling action platformer, but it didn't stop there. Instead, it stacked on a smorgasbord of extra mechanics that made it stand out from its peers, if also a bit confusing for your average sugar-fueled 8-year-old. Gameplay begins with Leonardo, as players navigate a Legend of Zelda-style top-down overworld. Entering buildings or sewer entrances transitions you into more traditional 2D side-scrolling action, where the real meat of the game takes place. Like Mega Man or Castlevania, you've got a health bar that depletes with every enemy hit, and you'll be jumping and swinging your weapon like any good platforming hero. So far, so familiar, but here's where it gets interesting. At any time, you can swap between any of the 4 turtles, each with their own life bar and weapon. Donatello has long reach with his bow staff, Raphael is fast but stubby, and Michelangelo, well, let's just say he's present. This mechanic meant you weren't truly defeated until all 4 turtles had been taken out, offering a kind of proto-life system built directly into the cast. It added a surprising level of strategy for its era. While later NES games like Little Samson would be praised for this character switching design, Turtles and Wonder Boy The Dragon Trap on the Master System both experimented with it earlier, albeit in different forms. For 1989, this was ambitious stuff. But ambition doesn't always equal polish, and as we'll see, that ambition might have also been the game's undoing. As for the game's plot, yes it has one. Surprisingly, it sees our heroes in a half shell on a mission to retrieve the Life Transformer gun, a device allegedly capable of turning their ratty mentor, Splinter, back into his original human form. Quite why a rat that can talk teach martial arts and wear a dressing gown needs fixing is beyond me, but hey, this was the 80s, we rolled with it. On the way, the Turtles must also rescue the ever-kidnapped April O'Neil, disarm a series of bombs beneath a dam, and battle their way across the city, facing familiar and unfamiliar foes alike. In short, it's a Turtles' greatest hits tour, whether you were ready for it or not. Some areas require specific objects to be completed, such as collecting a key item or defeating a boss, while others simply need you to survive long enough to crawl out of the other side. Health pickups come in the form of pizza slices. Naturally, you can also acquire a range of sub-weapons, shurikens, boomerangs and scrolls that add a touch of much needed variety to the combat. The scrolls in particular are notoriously overpowered, assuming you can survive long enough to get your hands on any. So while on the surface this may look like a typical NES platformer, the game actually mashes together a surprising number of mechanics, multiple characters, resource management, non-linear level progression, and overworld exploration, a melting pot of ideas that arguably bit off more pepperoni than it could chew. Now, up to this point, we've looked at the what, but what about the when? How did people feel about this game at the time? Well, despite the vitriol it would eventually attract in later years, contemporary reviews were actually very positive on release. Nintendo Power, in classic house organ fashion, fawned over the title, stating, "The game is based on the characters created in Eastman and Laird's hit comic book of the same name, and will feature all of the fast action and crazy ninja tactics that you love in the comic book. One of the best things about this game is the superb play control in the action scenes and the super sharp graphics." They were smitten, in other words. Meanwhile, the Game Machine chimed in with, "Initial playability is high, all the turtle sprites are well drawn and animated, and the bad guys present quite the challenge. Teenage Mutant Hero Turtles is a very playable slash 'em up. I just hope that whoever's producing the home computer version hurries up." Even the British press were handing out turtle-shaped gold stars. The publication Raise, a short-lived but wonderfully weird gaming mag, showered the game with praise, with one gloriously self-aware writer quipping, "I'm not quite the person that all the Ninja Turtle hype is aimed at. I'm almost 61, you know. But even I had a great time playing the NES version of the Fab Force Frolics. The difficulty factor is set just right, frustrating, but nothing to put your Nintendo in physical danger. The 5 action-packed levels are more than the average player can handle, but they just keep enticing you back for more." High praise from someone who likely hadn't watched the cartoon, read the comics, or eaten pizza in decades. Meanwhile, computer and video games highlighted just how deeply the Turtles had embedded themselves in the European market. They noted that Teenage Mutant Hero Turtles, yes hero, thanks to the UK's inexplicable fear of the word ninja, had become such a recognisable brand that Nintendo began bundling the game with NES consoles in certain territories. This was a big deal. Remember, the NES had largely underperformed in the UK compared to its dominance in Japan and North America, but by making Turtles an NES packing game in my country, the sheer draw of the Turtles was strong enough that the mutant amphibians would function as Nintendo's ticket into British living rooms, with the NES outselling the Master System that Christmas in the UK for the first time. Computer and Video Games wrote, "The Teenage Mutant Hero Turtles have certainly cowabungered their way into this issue with a vengeance. Teenage Mutant Hero Turtles really is a super cartridge, and what's more, it's now being given away free with the console itself. Extremely good value, both for those who buy it and those who get it for now. So yes, critics liked it, Nintendo backed it, and more importantly, kids bought it in the droves. The game would go on to sell over 4 million copies worldwide, putting it among the top-selling titles on the NES. And this wasn't just a case of blind brand loyalty. Adults who had no vested interest in the cartoon were still finding themselves strangely enamoured with the game's challenge, complexity and replayability. In short, this wasn't seen as some cynical shovelware tie-in, it was considered a legitimate quality video game. But that just raises the ultimate question. If Turtles was so well received at launch, what the hell happened? How did we go from glowing reviews and bundled consoles to YouTube rants and angry retrospectives? Well, my friends, strap in because it's time to descend into the sewer and uncover how this game's legacy got flushed down the drain. From what I can gather, trawling through the fossilised remains of early internet forums and childhood trauma confessions, it seems that even at launch many kids found this game absolutely soul-destroying. Like most titles from the 8-bit era, Turtles expected players to die, frequently, and learn from it. Trial and error was practically a genre in itself. You'd play, you'd perish, you'd try again, rinse, repeat, rage quit, resume. And while this masochistic loop was par for the course back in the day, Turtles took things a step further. Players were being punished within seconds of booting up the game, sometimes steamrolled by a van before they could even get their bearings. Forget learning curves, this game handed you a brick and told you to carve one for yourself. Now, as someone who didn't play this game until adulthood, I can confirm it's rough. Picking it up cold in the modern era is like being thrown into the deep end of a swimming pool filled with electrified seaweed. Death comes quickly, frequently, and often unfairly. Still, let's be fair, brutal difficulty wasn't unusual in the 1980s. NES games were designed to test your patience, your memory and your reflexes, so why did this game, in particular, get labelled with the scarlet letter of garbage tier design? Well, part of it lies in who the game was aimed at. This was, after all, a licensed product aimed squarely at kids, and many of those kids, bless their hearts, didn't quite know what to make of it. Some were baffled by the controls, others felt the mechanics were clunky or even broken, but most of all, they were disappointed. And that disappointment largely centred around the characters, or more accurately, the absence of certain characters. You see, a lot of children expected the game to be a direct adaptation of the cartoon series they loved, but there was a big problem with that expectation. This game wasn't based on the cartoon. Not really. What those kids didn't realise was that the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles originated in comic book form, first published by Mirage Studios back in 1984, a full 3 years before the animated show debuted. The tone of the comic was grittier, more mature, and decidedly less pizza-fueled, and Konami's game, believe it or not, leans more towards that source material. You can see it most clearly in the box art. The turtles were drawn with angular, serious expressions, and crucially, all four wear red bandanas, a direct homage to the original Mirage comics where the turtles were indistinguishable by colour. That alone should have been a tip-off that this wasn't your Saturday morning cartoon simulator. So for all the kids who booted up expecting bright colours, wacky villains and wisecracking hijinks, what they got instead was a harsh, punishing trek through grim cityscapes with only the vaguest trace of a show they recognised. And that, my friends, is where the rift between expectation and reality first began. The confusion over the game's tone and content becomes even more understandable once you realise Krang, the brain in the bodysuit icon of the cartoon, was nowhere to be found. To the average child of the late 80s, this was unforgivable. Where was the squishy villain from Dimension X? Had the developers just forgotten him? Were they idiots? Well, no. The truth is that Krang didn't actually exist in the original Turtle source material. He was created specifically for the 1987 cartoon series as a toy-friendly villain, loosely inspired by the Ultrons from the comics. So when this NES game was being developed, Krang wasn't considered essential, because he wasn't part of the real canon. The Mirage comic canon, that is. So at a glance it might seem like Konami were out of touch with what kids expected, but in reality it was the kids who were out of touch with the broader Turtles lore. But things get murkier, because once you boot up the game, Despite that comic-inspired box art with all red bandanas, inside the actual gameplay, the turtles are colour-coded exactly like the cartoon. Red, blue, orange, purple. Not only that, but Rocksteady and Bebop, two goons invented solely for the animated show, appear as bosses. So even though the game skews towards the darker comic stylings in tone and packaging, it clearly borrows recognisable cartoon elements too. Adding to the multiversal mess, both the Mirage and Archie comic book series running at the same time. The Archie run, based on the cartoon, launched in 1988, but Krang didn't show up until issue 4, released in December of that year, so even within the comics, timelines were tangled and canons were clashing. In short, the NES game is a bizarre hybrid. Its box art screams Mirage, its sprite work nods to the cartoon, and its rosters cherry-picked from both. The result, a game that pleased no one fully, yet vaguely resembled something everyone recognised. So when little Timmy sat down with his NES expecting to fight Krang, zip through technodromes and laugh at the cowabunga quips, he instead got an unusually dark, surprisingly difficult action-adventure where his favourite brain alien never even shows up. No wonder there were tears before bedtime. And that disconnect stuck. Even years later, many players remembered the absence more than the game itself. Fast forward to June 21st, 2006, it had been 17 years since the game's release. And suddenly, it's back in the spotlight. Why? Because a certain foul-mouthed film nerd from Philadelphia uploaded what would become one of the most iconic retro gaming rants of all time. The nerd did not hold back. In what was only his 5th episode at the time, James Rolfe, then going by the moniker of the Angry Nintendo Nerd, unleashed a profanity-laced tirade against the NES Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles game. He famously declared it the most annoying game he'd ever played, going as far as to say it sucks ass from a straw, a poetic turn of phrase that has since been etched into retro gaming legend. Over the course of roughly 7 glorious minutes, Rolfe took a blowtorch to the game's quirks and shortcomings. He mocked the incessant low-health beeping, the imbalanced character roster, and the sheer number of cheap deaths a player could rack up within seconds of pressing start. His main gripe? That Donatello was the only turtle worth using thanks to his absurdly long and overpowered bow staff, making the rest of the team feel like disposable backup dancers. He pointed out the ridiculous overwhelmed death traps, like the infamous steamroller that can flatten you before you can even enter a proper level. He also highlighted several now iconic pain points: the underwater dam level with its electrified seaweed and brutal time limit, the cryptic and nonsensical platforming sections, the unreachable slice of pizza that taunts you from behind a wall, and the laughable moment when you can just walk across a supposed obstacle without issue. Even the absence of Krang gets a mention, because of course it does. The episode was hilarious, but it also stuck hard.
I've had more fun playing with dog turds, shredders my ass and splinters my balls. This game is an inside-out asshole regurgitating putrid anal fecal matter.
This early AVGN entry went viral in a pre-algorithm YouTube era and played a huge role in launching Rolfe's now legendary channel. But while it skyrocketed his popularity, it simultaneously helped sink the public perception of the NES Turtles game for good. Gamers who had long buried this title in the attic were suddenly digging it back out. Only now, not with nostalgia, but with pitchforks, and the wave of retrospective ridicule was only just beginning. As mentioned earlier, this renewed interest in the game wasn't limited to just angry internet comedians. In 2007, just a year after the nerd's takedown, Konami re-released Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles for the Wii Virtual Console. A bold move, a second chance perhaps, but instead of a warm nostalgic welcome, the game was met with a tidal wave of negativity from the gaming press. Only this time, there were no jokes, no gimmicks, no retro charm. Just critics tearing it to shreds. Reading through the reviews from 2007, you start to notice a pattern, one that sounds suspiciously familiar. Take Nintendo Life for example. They opened their scathing write-up with, "Turtle Mania was sweeping the world when this came out in 1989. That's probably why this game was so popular, despite it being an unfair bag of dogs droppings." Now, where have we heard that sort of eloquent literary analysis before? Oh right, James Rolfe, 1 year earlier, in a viral video that referred to the game as sucking arse from a straw. The tonal overlap is so blatant, you'd be forgiven for thinking Nintendo Life was doing nerd cosplay. The rest of their critique falls in line with that same sentiment. They echoed the now common claim that Donatello is the only useful turtle due to his god-tier range, while the others are effectively deadweight. They asserted that the game's reputation was built on branding alone, not quality, and implied that nostalgia had been pulling the wool over people's eyes for years. Amusingly, this directly contradicts all those original launch reviews written by adults who'd never seen the cartoon and still praised the game for its challenge and variety. Funny how hindsight works, but they didn't stop there, adding that one slight mess up and you'd have to backtrack several screens, taking more and more damage. This just doesn't work in a game of this nature, it adds to the frustration factor. And finally, their parting words were, don't let childhood nostalgia blind you to the flaws this game has. By all means, if you have fond memories of this from when you were a kid, download it, but don't say we didn't warn you. Harsh. This wasn't just a lukewarm retrospective, it was a full-blown beatdown. And whether intentionally or not, the tone mirrored the Nerd's video almost line for line. The Nerd had created a new narrative for how this game should be remembered, and the critics of the mid-2000s were now reading straight from it. And so, just like that, the once celebrated NES Turtles game had been recast in the court of public opinion, not as a beloved staple, but as a clunky, overrated mess that had only ever succeeded thanks to catchy theme tunes and aggressive toy marketing. Not every critic in 2007 was discovering the game for the first time though. Over at IGN, the reviewer actually confessed to have played the game as a child, and liked it. In fact, he proudly admitted to making it all the way to the end, but even nostalgia couldn't save it in his eyes. Despite having fond memories, he echoed the same grievances we've heard time and time again, chief among them the missing cartoon cast, because here we are again with the Krang obsession. Apparently, the absence of everyone's favourite disembodied brain was such an emotional wound that not even 17 years of distance could heal it. He also dusted off the now standard criticism of the game's unbalanced character lineup, writing Leonardo's katana blade and Donatello's bow are the only true effective weapons in the game, and more often than not you will find yourself exploring the map with Michelangelo and Raphael simply because they are more dispensable. Ouch. Meanwhile, GameSpot didn't even pretend to be sentimental about it. They labelled the game as flat out bad and had the audacity to mock Konami for charging $6 for what they viewed as a relic better left buried. Their specific critiques echoed the now familiar chorus: poor design, brutal difficulty, uneven mechanics. So what does this all tell us? That between 1989 and 2007, public opinion on the NES Turtles game had flipped harder than a Foot Clan flunky hit by a manhole cover. In the late 1980s, it was hailed as one of the console's top sellers, praised for its complexity, praised for its variety, praised for simply being a good game. Fast forward less than 2 decades, and it's being reviewed like a war crime with extra pizza sauce. Yes, of course, games age, we see the rough edges, we understand that what once seemed groundbreaking might now seem quaint, or even clunky. That's normal, but here's the thing. When people talk about games like GoldenEye or Super Mario 64, they acknowledge those titles haven't aged perfectly. But nobody's throwing them under the bus, nobody's calling them garbage, there's respect. With Turtles though, the respect didn't just vanish, it got replaced with open contempt. And you just have to ask, was that shift earned? Or did a certain angry nerd with a camera recorder and a sewer full of sarcasm help shape a new, nastier narrative? What genuinely surprises me about this whole saga is how little slack the game was given in the end. Not a shred of, well, was good for its time, or even a nostalgic pat on the shell. And I can't help but wonder just how much that shift was influenced by James Rolfe's satirical demolition job just a year earlier. Now, I'm not suggesting the nerd single-handedly assassinated the game's reputation, but it's hard to ignore the timing. Before that video dropped, Turtles was largely remembered as tough but nostalgic. Afterwards, it was a punchline. Then came an unexpected twist. A couple of years ago, Cinemassacre, the very channel that launched that infamous 2006 takedown, released a brand new video revisiting the NES Turtles game. And it wasn't more satire. It was a thoughtful, surprisingly candid discussion about the impact that episode had created. Mike Matai, a longtime collaborator and co-architect of the Angry Video Game Nerd series, admitted he's grown tired of having to defend the game at conventions. He openly reflected on the fact that he may have contributed to the game's long-standing bad rap, simply by helping produce one very funny but very damning video. He clarified that the nerd episodes are comedy. They're exaggerations, meant to entertain, not to be taken as literal reviews. Sure, they contain kernels of truth, but they're laced with slapstick, hyperbole, and toilet humour for maximum comedic effect. The newest Cinemassacre video was a full 36-minute breakdown that revisited the criticisms from the original episode, and explained point by point why judging the game solely through that lens was unfair. It made the case that if you approach Turtles as a serious piece of software from 1989 and not a meme from 2006, Its design choices deserve more credit than they've been getting. And just like that, the conversation started to shift again. Like myself today, Matai pointed out something that seems to go over the heads of most critics. This game isn't meant to strictly follow any single Turtles canon. It's not a direct adaptation of the cartoon, nor is it a perfect translation of the Mirage comics. It's a strange, radioactive cocktail of both. And that's precisely why the game's world feels so inconsistent. Because it is. But that doesn't make it wrong. It makes it a product of its time, when brand consistency took a backseat to creative license and close enough was considered a solid design strategy. He also made a point of defending Michelangelo and Raphael, those poor maligned brothers who've been branded useless in article after article. But Matai argued quite rightly that both characters are more than just Donatello's backup dancers. Under the right conditions, they can one-hit certain enemies, and their speed and responsiveness can be used to your advantage if you know when and how to switch between them. The turtle switching mechanic isn't just a gimmick or a glorified life system, it's integral to the game's design. And from what I've seen, most critics back in 2007 never quite grasped that. They treated Donnie like a cheat code and ignored the rest. Then there's the infamous stuff that the angry video game nerd made a meal out of, like the unreachable slice of pizza, the sewer jump, and that bit in the warehouse where you can just walk across an obvious gap.
We can just walk over it? You can just walk over it.
According to Matai, these weren't examples of bad programming. They were deliberate design choices meant to teach the player something. The unreachable pizza, for example, is there to make you run, to introduce urgency and train your survival instincts. The sewer jump and warehouse shortcut, they're safe zones, low-risk tutorial moments that ease you into the idea that not everything is as it seems, and that obstacles can be overcome with experimentation, not just brute force. Even the steamroller death trap at the start of the overworld isn't as cruel as it seems. It's there to teach you that the world map is just as dangerous as the levels themselves. Sure, you'll die, but you'll also learn, and the lesson only costs you one turtle, not a game over. Matai also addressed the most hated level in the game, the underwater dam with its electrified plants. He argued that it's actually manageable if you practice, if you memorise the layout, and if you use turtle switching wisely to absorb damage and keep your best characters alive. Personally, I'd go even further. I think those plants are supposed to be hard. They exist specifically to force you to think tactically, to experiment, to learn how to rotate your team instead of just brute forcing everything with Donatello like a big purple crutch. It's not broken, it's brutal but deliberate. And in that light, many of the things people call flaws start to look a lot more like challenges, the kind we used to pride ourselves on overcoming. Turtles is not about breezing through on your first try, it's about mastery. Matai summed it up well. It's repetition, knowledge, and twitch reflexes. Like many games of its era, it assumes you've got nothing better to do than play the same level 50 times until your thumbs become muscle memory incarnate. That said, it's not all pain and punishment. There are strategies to dramatically reduce the difficulty, something most of the 2007 critics didn't seem to grasp. Turtle switching isn't just helpful, it's vital. Choosing the right turtle for the right situation and managing their health like a pool of shared lives is what separates the sewer scum from the pizza pros. Sub-weapons too can change everything. The boomerangs in particular are incredibly effective, especially when you realise you can catch and reuse them by timing your jumps. Little tricks like this make the game less a blunt force beatdown and more of a tactical endurance test. And let's talk about healing. One of the most overlooked aspects of the game is how forgiving it actually is when it comes to recovery. Many people think you're screwed once you're low on health, but that's simply not true. If you leave a room and re-enter, the pizza slice inside will respawn. Infinite health, baby, provided you don't mind farming it like a pizza power gremlin. Even KO turtles aren't gone for good. There are secret buildings scattered across the overworld map where you can rescue fallen brothers and bring them back into the fight. Again, it's a layer of strategic planning that most people miss, especially if they're approaching the game with blind rage instead of curiosity. So yes, the game is tough, but it's fairer than it gets credit for. Beneath its crusty exterior is a game with more depth than most of its 8-bit peers. A game that dares to mix platforming, open world exploration, character management and tactical combat into one hard-shelled package. That complexity, however, may have been its greatest enemy. For many players, especially younger ones, it was just too much. Too many ideas, too many mechanics, too much punishment. And the result, many never saw what the game truly had to offer. Fast forward to 2025 and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles for the NES remains as divisive as ever. For some, it's a childhood trauma machine, for others, it's an underrated classic. Its legacy lies not in being universally loved or loathed, but how it fiercely continues to split opinion. And maybe that's the true sign of a game worth remembering. Not a masterpiece, not a mess, just misunderstood. Don't forget you can use my links to get Shredder's Revenge for under $15, Streets of Rage 4 for under $10, and one of my favourite brawlers ever, Double Dragon Gaiden, for less than $5. I have huge discounts on thousands of games available via the pinned comment. Each purchase supports the channel and you get bargains simultaneously. Happy shopping and cheerio!